I don't know if this can be said about any other conference in America, but we pretty much know the game in the Big 12. It's Texas, Oklahoma again, and it's probably part one of two. And of course, at the Texas State Fair, as always, the huge tradition of the Red River Shootout, rivalry, showdown, whichever version you want to go with. We got Steve Helwick on the line, of course, University of Texas graduate, covered the football team there during his time at both the newspaper and the television station on campus. Now works for SB Nation. Steve, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing excellent. I'm actually watching college football now. Kind of nice to have it on a Wednesday with App State and Louisiana playing on ESPN2 right now. That will be the first of what I think will be conference championship rematches in December. I think this Sun Belt game going on right now meets again in December. And I also think that this Texas-Oklahoma game that we have this weekend will meet in December. So we have a pair of conference championship previews this weekend, it looks like. And as of right now, these are looks like clearly the top two teams in the Big 12. And as always, no matter how much better Oklahoma usually seems than Texas, this is always a good game. Texas has stolen some as unranked recently, while Oklahoma's been ranked. And then last year, Texas went 1-1 against Oklahoma, beating them in October on Cameron Dicker's field goal before losing 39-27 for the Big 12 championship in Arlington. So it's always a good game. State Fair is always out there too. Great atmosphere. Last year was the first time I went to it, and this year should be one of the biggest ones in recent memory, considering the stature of both teams right now.
Yeah, anytime there appears to be a clear-cut champion or a clear-cut 1-2 punch, I'm always looking in the offseason for who could possibly break this up. I looked at TCU. Iowa State was a lot of people's dark horse selection. Oklahoma State had a couple nice wins early in the season and appear to be prime, especially even though they lost at Texas. It was at Texas, and it was only by 6 points. Then they turn around and get drubbed at Texas Tech. So these two would appear to be something would have to drastically change for there to be any other result to this season than Oklahoma and Texas, a rematch in the Big 12 championship game. Of course, Oklahoma's been king of the hill for as long as we've had you on, and far before that, we've talked about Oklahoma's status in the Big 12 and Texas inching its way toward that type of status. And as you mentioned, even during a Oklahoma college football playoff season under Baker Mayfield, Texas was able to pull off the upset. And certainly they've been much better in the last few years as Sam Ehlinger has gone from vying for that job with Shane Buechele to winning the job, being spiritual leader, quarterback, gamer, to more polished passer, and really has rounded out his game. And this is the season. I don't know who the better team is. I know Oklahoma is an 11-point favorite right now, but Texas should have the better defense and an offense that's not as good as Oklahoma, but at least has that explosive capability of keeping up with them, possibly.
Now, here's the thing so far. Oklahoma's actually had the better defense so far this season. Now, their opponents, they played Houston, they played UCLA, Kansas, and Texas Tech from the FBS. But the Oklahoma team of yesteryear is not giving up just 16 points to Texas Tech, the same Texas Tech team that's going around the next week and putting up 45 on Oklahoma State. Oklahoma's defense has been reworked under Alex Grinch. And Kenneth Murray, he's the star of that defense. He's one of the most talented players on the field every time he takes on. Oklahoma couldn't really say that about players on past defenses. In their secondary this year, I think they're ranked 37th in pass defense. Their secondary is legitimately good this year. They have two really good safeties. Delaire Turner, or Yell is one of them. Trey Brown's another one. They're getting all these pass deflections. They're doing really well in man and zone coverage throughout the year. I saw a lot of what they did against Houston, and especially in the first half with that really good offense led by De'Aaron King. And Oklahoma's defense just looked vastly superior in that regard. So Oklahoma's defense has really amped up this year, and I think that's actually what makes the Sooners scary. Combine that with Jalen Hurts. I'll be honest, I was not impressed with Jalen Hurts' play at Alabama. He was surrounded by great players at every position, and I thought that quarterback was a weak point of Alabama with him. Now you have him work with Lincoln Riley, and Jalen Hurts looks like a Heisman frontrunner along with Joe Burrow and Jonathan Taylor right now, because Jalen Hurts had that game against Houston where he broke out on the scene. He had, I think, just 3 incompletions and 3 rushing touchdowns, 3 passing touchdowns, and just ridiculous video game like numbers in that regard. He continued that against UCLA. Hasn't been as good in the past couple weeks, but still rolling along. So this Oklahoma team is still as scary, even without Kyler Murray, even without Marquise Hollywood Brown. And I think Texas should be aware of that. I really like what I've seen out of Texas this year, except for the first half in the LSU game. My biggest issue with Texas is their depth and all the injuries. They have a lot of guys hurt in the secondary right now, and that could make Oklahoma's offense really lethal this game. Missing guys like Caden Stearns, Josh Thompson, Jalen Green in the secondary. I think that could really affect how Texas contains the passing game, because they showed some holes against West Virginia last week. West Virginia went down in the first half on that first drive. They just passed right down the field, didn't even run it on that first drive. And then West Virginia was still in command a little into the second quarter, but Texas needed to force some turnovers to beat the Mountaineers. So I think we have a lot of interesting storylines going into this year, whether Texas can overcome all of its depth issues in the secondary, and if Oklahoma's defense can finally impose their will on Texas and hold them under the 40 points, because last year's game was well into the 40s.
All right, we got Steve Helwick on the line to break down Texas and Oklahoma. The Sooners and the Longhorns always get together at the beginning of October, of course, at the Texas State Fair, and this one should put the winner in the driver's seat in the Big 12. When you look at Texas, besides the injury issues, and they're substantial, maybe if a guy gets nicked up or there's a few guys out, we're looking at week 6 of the season. This is typical. But to have that many players at a position that is critical in defending against one of the most prolific offenses in college football, that really could factor into this game. Is there anywhere that you feel that Texas has the advantage over Oklahoma?
I think that the offense can – I think that even though Oklahoma's defense has improved, I think Texas's offense will still be better than it. Sam Ehlinger, outside of the West Virginia game, he's had a pretty good season this year. He threw one really bad interception and threw a lot of inaccurate passes against West Virginia. But for the most part, one thing that makes Ehlinger special is he never gets rattled. You see a lot of quarterbacks, even some of the best, where they'll just have a game where it's not going well, and then they kind of turn into like a LeBron James in the 2011 finals thing where it seems to get to his head. But that doesn't happen with Sam Ehlinger. Ehlinger, it's just every play seems independent of the one previous before it, and he's really good at that. Last week we saw on third downs, he stayed composed, and his execution was tremendous. That first drive Texas has, now they don't make the field goal. They actually end up with 0 points. But I think on the first 4 or 5 third downs, they were all 3rd and 7 or longer, and Ehlinger every time converted, whether it was with his legs or through the air. And I think that type of composure is what Texas really needs against a team like Oklahoma that's going to test them, especially on defense. Having the offense stay calm and composed throughout and test Oklahoma's defense. Texas is by far the best opponent the Sooners will have faced this year. I'd say Houston or Texas Tech probably. Yeah, Texas Tech only has that loss to Arizona outside of the Oklahoma loss. So Texas Tech's the second best opponent they face this year, and Oklahoma steamrolled them. So now it's Texas's time to present the Sooners their first challenge of the year, keep this game within one possession, because this new group of Sooners, they don't know how to play in close games yet. That's a completely different experience. Now, Texas has had that with Oklahoma State. They've won that game by 6 points, and they were challenged by LSU in week 2. They caught up at the end to make that one-possession game. So Texas has an advantage in that regard, and they know how to play in critical situations, and they've executed. They executed late in the LSU game. It was just a matter of they were down too much in the early going. And in the Oklahoma State game, they staved off an Oklahoma State comeback that was coming to the end. So this team knows how to keep its composure in the fourth quarter, and I think that's one thing that could play into Texas's advantage going this week.
Yeah, Oklahoma trailed for the first time all season 7-0 against Kansas, and then it was 45-7 about 4 quarters later before they let up a couple meaningless touchdowns. Obviously, they have not had the out-of-conference schedule that they typically have. They did schedule Houston and UCLA, who did not prove to be as good as what maybe they expected when the contracts were signed. So this could be and should be the first Oklahoma challenge that they've faced this season. Texas, on the other hand, of course, with the huge showdown at home against LSU, were decidedly not as good as LSU, but it certainly wasn't anything close to a blowout. It was still a game up in the air with 2 to 3 minutes left, but just couldn't get close to Joe Burrow enough to really affect the passing game, and that's where they got torn up, and that doesn't bode well, considering that Jalen Hurts is probably nearly as good a passer as Joe Burrow, maybe not quite as good, but obviously brings the dynamic of the running impact, as does Sam Ehlinger, who ripped up the Sooners at this point last year for 314 yards through the air, 72 on the ground, and a 3-touchdown day as the Longhorns won at 48-45 to set up, of course, the rematch and Oklahoma's win for the Big 12 championship. In regards to either one of these teams challenging at the national level, what are your thoughts about their ability to raise their game outside the Big 12?
Both of those teams have those potential. Texas has kind of gotten an opportunity already at facing a team of that caliber, and they got the luxury of doing it at home, but they just couldn't execute against LSU. LSU is a level above Texas right now, so we've seen how the Longhorns can fare against teams like that. As for Oklahoma, we don't know yet. Oklahoma has made the playoff 3 times. They've goose-egged every time, gone out in the first round, and they really should have beat Georgia that one year where they played in the Rose Bowl. That was an excellent game in overtime with a blocked field goal. But in the other ones, Oklahoma kind of just got crushed. So we're still waiting for Oklahoma to really hit that national championship. But I don't know if this is the year, because I think this is as loaded as a top 6 to 8 teams as we've had in a long time, because Alabama and Clemson look great, but they still look vulnerable. Ole Miss controlled that Alabama game for, a quarter and a half. South Carolina hung with them. Then Clemson was a 2-point conversion away from losing to North Carolina. So I don't know if it's just a top 2 anymore. I mean, I want to say that there's a lot more to college football this year, although a lot of people say that every year and it ends up being Bama Clemson. But it actually does, just because LSU's revamped their offense. Oklahoma's revamped their defense. Those teams have fixed these weak points that have hindered them for so many years, and I think that's something that's going to play a big factor going forward. If Oklahoma can have an above-average defense, they're a national title contender. And with Jalen Hurts and CeeDee Lamb, all these weapons that they have, Trey Sermon, Grant Calcaterra, their offense is absolutely loaded. So now losing a lot of linemen was a problem to the draft, guys like Ben Powers. But now that they have a strong defense, and with the offensive line, they can improve game by game. That's a unit that usually gets better as it goes on. Oklahoma does have the makings of a national title contender. I just think college football as a whole this year, with Ohio State, LSU, Alabama, Clemson, all those teams, it might be a little too competitive, where the Sooners probably aren't a top 4 team by the end of the year.
It's Oklahoma, Texas. The winner takes control of the Big 12. Texas, of course, trying to hold up despite the injuries in the defensive backfield. They gave up 367 yards passing to Austin Kendall and a couple touchdowns through the air in holding on for a win against West Virginia, a game in which they largely had a pretty good cushion. Oklahoma has obviously not been challenged at all in any way, shape, or form against the likes of Texas Tech, Kansas, and a pretty light non-conference schedule. It's the Red River Rivalry Showdown. It's huge, and it's always one to mark on your calendars as a college football fan. Steve Hillwick from SB Nation helping us break it down. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by.